Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the DFO DFS Report. It is Friday, February the 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to those of you who celebrate. If you aren't celebrating, you're probably here with us. So welcome in. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Friday as well. Cheers. Me and Zach are indulging on this beautiful Friday afternoon. We are going to break down this two-game slate that we have tomorrow. Figured, why come along, wake up early, especially you, Zach, on the West Coast. Why come early? Why wake up early? Come on tomorrow morning. Let's just get it over with. Do it tonight. Give the people, a long runway to watch the show. If they aren't able to catch the live feed, if they want to watch tomorrow morning, it'll be up there whenever they're ready. So we're going to break down tomorrow's two-game slate. We've got some lines maybe a little bit more guessy. We might find out a little bit more about the United States lineup tomorrow is the one that I think is mostly in question, just their new line combinations. They were really shuffling things around in the second half of that Finland game. But another really fun game yesterday, Zach. I nearly nailed the final score in back-to-back games to open the tournament. I think I called a 5-1 U.S. win. It ended up being 6-1. And you said, what, 4-1?
I think I had 4-1. Yeah. So we were right around it, man.
It was looking dicey, too. I bet the over in that game yesterday as well. And it was looking dicey through two periods. And all of a sudden, the third period, the U.S. explosion was like, oh, okay, this is easy. So, yes, if you're not aware or you don't know the schedule, tomorrow Sweden hosts Finland in the early game at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then Canada hosts the USA, what should just be a tremendous hockey game at 8 p.m. Eastern. So, should be a lot of fun. DraftKings, the pricing is a little bit different. I think the first two showdown slates, pricing felt a little bit softer. It was pretty easy to kind of do whatever you want. I think this pricing still fairly soft, but it's a little bit more difficult to just kind of jam in exactly what you want to do. So we're going to break these two games down. Because it's a small tournament, it's going to be a little bit different from our normal shows. We're not going to have the matchups and the line stats, obviously. We're just going to kind of roll through projections and talk about kind of our favorite plays. So we'll start with the Sweden-Finland game. Sweden are the largest favorites of the two games. They're minus 205 currently in the betting market, implied total of 3.3, implied total for Finland of 2.4. To me, Zach, we were talking about this a little bit before we came live. This feels like the much lower event game of the two. Me personally, wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being like a 3-1 Sweden win. So I know, even yesterday, Finland hung around against the United States, but they really had a difficult time generating much offense whatsoever. Like if you played Rupe Hintz or Sebastian Aho or Mikko Rantanen, like you were left just with bagels in your lineup. The guys who got on the board for the Finns were just kind of the depth defenseman picking up. Mata had an assist. Yoki Haru scored a goal. You didn't really get a whole lot. And I wouldn't be totally shocked if this ends up being a similar game against Sweden. So I'm saying like a 3-1 type Sweden win. So I like building around Sweden yet again. And then obviously mixing in parts of Canada, USA. Do you have any feelings on how you plan to, your ideal build, I guess? Like I'm assuming you're going to build a lot of lineups, but if you could only build one, what are you thinking your ideal build is going to be?
Yeah, for me, it's probably going to be like my ideal build is probably like a game stack of Canada, US in some way, shape, or form, right? Take one of the two top lines from either teams, mix in some of those depth forward pieces too. And we saw in that Canada game, especially the Canadian side, the depth pieces really kind of got involved, right? So it wouldn't surprise me in the least to kind of see that happen here. Tomorrow. I just said today. That's kind of hilarious. Wouldn't surprise me to see that happen again tomorrow. So I think that's kind of the way that I'm going to be looking at it. But I could also see that Canada US game being like a 1-goal game. Maybe it's a 4-3 finish or something like that. But I think it's going to be a bit of a higher octane game for sure. And I think even if you just take a look at the betting markets and the lines here as well, they're looking at that Canada US game as a very, very close one. So down to a pick 'em for both sides here. So I think we can kind of look at the betting market and get an idea of where we want to attack this 2-game slate. You're on mute, Brock.
Yes, I'm on mute. Well, what I've learned from the tourney so far is play the third line, says Nick, which has worked out well because I've suggested the third lines in every game so far, really liking them as pivot options. It's worked pretty well to date. But yeah, let's break it down here. Let's start with the Sweden-Finland game. We'll start with the lines. It looks like no changes coming from the Swedish side of things. Raquel, Zibanejad, Nylander on the top line. They played heavy minutes in their opener. Forsberg, Pettersson, and Kempe on the second line. Bratt, Eriksson, Raymond on the third line. Arvidsson, Lindholm, and Nyquist on the fourth line. They didn't play much at all. Hedman, Brodin, Ekholm, Carlson, Forsling, Dahlin. Forsling played a massive amount of ice time despite being on the third pair. Dahlin was pretty noticeable in that Canada game as well. Eriksson, X, Banachad, Raymond, Nylander, and Victor Hedman on the top power play unit. Then you got Raquel, Pedersen, Bratt, Forsberg, Carlson on the second power play unit. I had a lot of Carlson that first game. It seemed like he was just smashing pucks into shin pads all night. Hopefully, if we play some Carlson in this slate, he's able to find the net with a little bit more success. We don't know for sure what Finland is going to do. They have not yet skated since this game. I wouldn't be, this seems so banged up. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't skate or at least do an optional skate. But I don't think we're going to get much of an indication of any, big changes from Finland outside of Kevin Lankinen getting the start. We know that's for sure. They did skate this morning, but we didn't get lines from them. So, with an afternoon start, we're probably not going to see too many drastic changes, even despite losing 6-1. They never really made any changes to their lineup throughout that game. So we're projecting the same lineup as last game. Lehkonen, Barkov, Rantanen on the top line, Hintz, Aho, Laine on the second line, Luosterainen, Lindell, Granlund on the third line. Then you got Teravainen, Haula, Armia on the fourth line. Then you got Mikkola, Lindell, Mata, Jokiharju, and then the third pair of Vakanainen and Mattapalo on the third pair. Power play units projected to be the same as well. Aho, Hintz, Rantanen, Laine, Barkov. Still going with that 5 forward power play. 1, Lehkonen, Lindell, Teravainen, Granlund, and Lindell on the second power play unit. So when you take a look here at the stack projections, Sweden 1 projects as the 5th highest projected line overall, despite only being 14,300. So I think, yet again, we talked about in the first game against Canada, Sweden was really nice value, and nothing's really changed for this game. They look like tremendous value here. If you actually sort by projection value, they grade out as the second best line behind Finland 2. Finland 2's price tag, super, super cheap, but man, I am terrified to do anything with Finland. Just, you got nothing from those guys. And we take a look here at the game log, thanks to our friends at Natural Stat Trick, there wasn't a whole lot, right? Hintz 0.18 expected goals for, and that's in all situations. Aho, literally nothing. So it's hard to feel that confident about that line, despite how well they kind of project. I have a lot more interest in Sweden 1. Nylander really was kind of the most noticeable player from the Sweden side of things. Him and Kempe led the way in terms of individual expected goals, 9 shot attempts from the two of them. So you like to see that. Nylander heavily involved, played over 20 minutes in that game as well. I think, you take a look, Nylander 20 and a half minutes, Raquel at 19 and a half minutes, and then Zibanejad was at over 20 minutes. That line is going to be leaned on super heavily again in this game. And at 14,300 to full stack them, they seem to make a ton of sense. I like Sweden 1 a lot. I think that I'll probably make my way down to the depth pieces of Sweden as well, because like you said, I think the ideal build is probably going to be some form of game stack of Canada, USA, and then just trying to pick off the value from the Sweden side of things. And I think the top line is certainly in the best spot overall. Raquel, 20 minutes at $3,600, probably the best value forward overall. But I mean, Bratt, Eriksson Ek, Lucas Raymond looked pretty good in that first game. They're all in the $4,000 range. And then that second line, Adrian Kempe at just $4,400 is just way too cheap. Like I said, 9 shot attempts in that first game. We know he's a good scorer. He looks like one of the other best value plays from the Sweden side of things. So really just kind of focusing on US Canada, but there's a lot to like about the depth forwards, or not the depth forwards, but the value forwards you get from the Sweden side of things in this game.
Yeah, 100%. I'll kind of go through it a similar way as you. Take a look at that Finland side. It was pretty ugly. Arturi Lehkonen, 4 shots on goal. For the first 7 shots on goal for the Finns, and couldn't get a 5th one through the rest of the game. That was definitely a little disappointing for anybody who played him there. I think, again, Barkov looks like he's probably going to be one of the stronger plays from that Finland side. 5 shots on goal, generated some good chances, 7 shot attempts for him in that side, or in that game as well. So, I don't mind building around Barkov on the Finland side. I've got interest in Rantanen, but again, like you mentioned too, just legitimately did nothing out there. He legitimately did nothing offensively out there. He took 1 shot attempt. Pretty ugly there. And, with him being $6,600, that's going to be a significant price point, I suppose, when you compare that to some of the other players that are out there on this slate. Matthew Tkachuk, $600 cheaper. Brady Tkachuk, $800 cheaper. Sam Reinhart, just $6,400, $200 cheaper. I mean, those are guys that I'm going to be wanting to play much more than Mikko Rantanen. So I think it's going to be tough to get to this Finland side. Again, Aho and Hintz, I mean, they looked like great value plays last night. Hintz was really disappointing for me last night. I was really, really heavy on him. So, I think for me, again, like you kind of said, this Sweden side really looks like the way to target this. Rickard Rakell at $3,600, probably going to be my highest owned player tomorrow. I'm probably going to have an absolute ton of him. And Adrian Kempe too at 4,400. I mean, he looked really solid in that game against Canada on Wednesday. So it's going to be kind of tough for me really to get to any really heavy Finland builds. They're definitely going to be kind of the get different spot. Even if you look back at that game against the US last night, they kept it pretty tight through the first 40 minutes of that game, right? And it wasn't really until the Americans, started to really pour it on in the third period where the game kind of got away from them. But they still had some looks. They still generated some chances, even still in that third. So again, when we talk about looking at this slate as a whole, probably going to be a tighter game here between Sweden and Finland. And it's really going to be to me, it feels like that's what's going to be the difference maker on the slate. Everybody's going to flock. We don't have a look at ownership or anything like that right now, but I think it's pretty safe to say that USA 1 might be the most expensive or most owned line on the slate when the ownership numbers come in, just because of how good Brady Tkachuk and Matthew Tkachuk were in that third period when they got put together.
Yeah, I think they're undoubtedly going to be the highest owned players on, at least forwards on the slate. I think, they looked great, but then also they're not expensive. You look at the kind of the top dogs in McDavid and Matthews and McKinnon and Jack Hughes even, and Sam Reinhart, Sidney Crosby, they're cheaper than all of those guys. Brady Tkachuk only being $5,800, Matthew Tkachuk only being $6K. It's so easy to get to them. They're definitely going to be among the highest owned. I said yesterday, Barkov is really the only Finnish forward I had any interest in, and that's kind of the same thing again. I think at $5,600, he's got a nice enough price tag there. Obviously, I'm going to have some Finland builds, and I'm probably going to 20 max. I'm going to have some Finland builds, but I'm just talking from if I was only building one, Barkov would probably be the only one that I would even consider at this point. Maybe some Lehkonen. He did have some decent shot volume, $3,500. I think he's okay, but the rest of it is pretty bleak. And I agree with you that Rakell and Kempe feel great. I really like William Nylander. $6,500 is going to be a little bit more difficult to get him in your lineups. You're going to have to get different with your Canada bills or punt some defensemen. I do think that a Rakell Zibanejad mini stack looks really affordable. Looks great if they're both going to be playing 20 minutes. And then the same thing goes with Eriksson Ek and Lucas Raymond. I talked about them in their first game against Canada. Super, super cheap, and they're both together on that top power play unit with Zibanejad and Nylander. So, maybe it's an Eriksson Ek, Raymond, Hedman stack to get some power play and 5v5 correlation, and then you go and target US and Canada because it's just so cheap to get Eriksson Ek and Raymond in the mix. So really kind of like those mini stacks from Sweden side of things. Rakell's advantage at Eriksson Ek, Raymond, preferably. I think you could probably talk me into some Kempe Pedersen as well, but probably trying to keep it a little bit cheaper in this game and then really spending most of my salary over on the other game. Let's talk about some defensemen from this game, Zach. Victor Hedman projects tremendously well. Just $4,600. He might be the highest owned defenseman on the slate. Just a ridiculous price tag there. If you're going to see 21 over 20 minutes again for Gustav Forsling at $3,600, we liked him in that first game. I think there's really no reason not to like him again in this one, especially given that price tag. The rest of the Swedish defensemen, like Dahlin, probably a little bit too expensive without the power play exposure. Just if he's more expensive than Hedman, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion. Brodin's still pretty cheap if you need to get there as well. I don't mind Erik Karlsson again. Like I said, he looked really engaged in that first game and looked solid. He was kind of all around it, not playing as much as the other guys, but second power play unit, $4,500. I think that price tag is pretty good. And if he can just find any way to get those shot attempts on net in this game, he'll be a much better player than he was in game one. If we take a look at individual shot attempts, Victor Hedman, 6 shot attempts, Erik Karlsson, 6 shot attempts. They both only got 1 shot on net in that game. So both could be pretty solid plays, but Victor Hedman was just an absolute workhorse in this game. 26 47 minutes, 15 seconds. Obviously, it went to overtime, so you're not going to see quite that much ice time. But I think I feel a lot better and more confident in the projections now that we've seen one game and at least kind of got a baseline of how much ice time these guys are going to see. And let's just take a look at it here from the Sweden side or the Finland side of things. Is really Barkov and Rantanen going to play a lot. Nylander, Zibanejad, Raquel. Eriksson Ek saw a healthy amount of ice time as well. So again, at 4,700 top power play unit, I like Eriksson Ek a lot. He saw a lot of ownership in that first game. I wouldn't be surprised if he sees a lot in this one as well. Any final thoughts just on this game, defenseman, some of these depth forwards? What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Esa Liddell looked really good last night too. Like, I think he's another solid value. Played $3,300. If you want to get up and play 25% Yokoharu, that could be a good route to go, given how productive he was in the one game last night. I mean, $2,500. I don't think I'll necessarily be getting there a lot, but I think especially when you kind of just look at the defenseman, even beyond this individual game here, and you just kind of look at it as a whole, there's not really a ton of really great dumpster dive options, I suppose. Jacob Slavin at $2,900 and Oli Mata at $2,800. They both look like they're going to be really solid plays. I don't know if I'm going to get down to that Vakanainen, Mantapalo, Yokoharu range really much, if at all, here, unless I'm really going with a heavy stars and scrubs kind of build, which I also think is kind of a valuable way to go here, because you're not really going to need a whole lot. And especially if you're game stacking the big pieces from Canada US, like if you're doing a double Kachuk, McDavid, Reinhardt, or McKinnon, Crosby, or something like that, you're going to have to dip down in price somewhere. And I think that, getting down to that Slavin, Oli Mata range is probably the way to go. I mean, Erik Karlsson, like $4,500, I think he's going to be a great play. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody who's overlooked a little bit too. Because when you look at the score or just the raw score from that game, 6.5 DraftKings points for Karlsson, an assist and one shot. But, if all of a sudden, one shot on goal turns to 4, you're looking at a really solid value play there. If you can find ways, like you mentioned, to get those pucks through. Gustav Forsling at $3,600, cheapest Swedish defenseman, grades out as the second best value on the Sweden side behind Hedman. I think he's a guy that I'm going to have a pretty heavy amount of again tomorrow. And I found myself getting to a little Matthias Ekholm as well, 7.6 DraftKings points in that first game. I don't think that's a terrible way to go. He'll probably see a pretty heavy amount of ice time again as well.
I agree that I think Erik Karlsson's a bit of a sneaky play just because he is going to get overlooked. Like with Hedman being just $100 more expensive and on power play one, top pairing, playing more minutes. Like it's just so much. It's so easy to just click on Hedman. He's $100 more. Like so, Forsling's going to be, Karlsson's probably going to be half the amount of ownership of Hedman. And then like I think again, if you're trying to play someone from the Finland side, it's the defenseman. It's going to be Lindell at $3,300. He's going to see a ton of ice time. Mata, I was shocked didn't block a single shot yesterday. I thought like that's where his value is going to come from. The early assist helps. Yokoharu, he scored one goal all season, and then he scored yesterday. I don't think he's going to get on the score sheet much, but projected for around 20 minutes with the lack of depth here. At $2,500, he's a huge salary saver. He could end up with a 0, but at $2,500, I don't mind getting there if he's going to play that ice time again. And then Slavin, we saw Jacob Slavin's ice time just kind of slowly go up last game. Him and Faber really turned into the new second pair, and then it ended up being Hannafin and Fox kind of in the third pairing role. So I think Slavin, I think Faber both make some sense. They're probably both going to play a lot more ice time, or like both be around 20 minutes. They're both projected for about 19 minutes tonight, or tomorrow, excuse me, and both around that 3K range. So I don't mind getting there from a depth defenseman. But let's focus in now on that U.S.-Canada game. As we mentioned at the top, basically a pick 'em right now. The Canadians were favored coming into the tournament. They were like minus 120, maybe 125 after the U.S. performance yesterday. Some money coming in on the U.S. It is exactly a pick 'em, both minus 110 at the moment. So unsurprisingly, you've got the top dogs from Canada here at the top with Reinhardt, McDavid, Marner. They project extremely well, not totally surprising. Canada 2 projects as the fourth best line with Crosby, McKinnon, Stone. it was interesting. I felt like the Crosby, McKinnon, Stone line was a little bit more noticeable in that first game. It felt like they were never not on the ice, but when you take a look at the ice time, it was actually the McDavid line that played a lot more. Maybe it was just a little bit more influence during the 5-on-5, but McDavid 21-25, Marner over 21 minutes, Reinhart around 19, then McKinnon under 20, Crosby 17, Stone 17. So a lot more ice time was actually given out to that McDavid line, which it felt like that Crosby McKinnon line was just on the ice at all times in that game. I don't know if that felt the same to you, but like McDavid was super noticeable. McDavid's going to have a big game on Saturday. I don't doubt that. He was buzzing. Maybe still trying to find the chemistry with Reinhart and Marner. Maybe a little bit more chemistry between Crosby and McKinnon. But let's start on this Canada side. What are you thinking here? Is it mostly going to be through these two top lines? Are you going to try to find some depth pieces? As I mentioned, it looks like Braden Point's going to move up. You got an all Tampa Bay line on line 3. They're very, very affordable, kind of easy to get to. Braden Point looked pretty solid in that first game. What are your plans here on the Canadian side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I'm definitely going to be heavy on these top two lines, as I think everybody else is going to be. I think your perception of that second line is pretty accurate. It felt like they were the ones who were out there like every other shift doing the most. Offensively, they were. I mean, we talk about like they were just tremendous when they were out there. Crosby 3 assists, McKinnon goal, and what did he have again? Just the 1 goal, but 6 shots on goal, 3 blocks. He had a huge game for the Canadian side. So, it wouldn't surprise me to see, the first line come in a little bit underowned on the Canada side versus that second line, just because of how noticeable McKinnon and Crosby have been out there. Of course, you always got the buzz about Sidney Crosby and how great he's been for Canada. He's always stepped up in the big moments. And I mean, like, he did it again. It was a huge performance from Crosby in game 1 against Sweden. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that second line make some more noise out there. Mark Stone at $3,800. That's a great price point for Mark Stone for me. I'm definitely going to have a lot of interest in him and getting him, mixed into these Canada stacks as well, because it's not going to take a whole lot for him to pay off. 4 shot attempts, 3 on goal. He had a huge goal in that game as well. So he's a guy who always feels like he finds a way to kind of get into the mix somehow. And at that price point is the cheapest guy in either of the top 6s from both of these teams. I think that's going to be a good way to kind of get yourself a little bit different there. But, I think I'm going to be a little heavier on that top line than that second line. I'm still going to have, good ownership coming in on Crosby and McKinnon without a doubt. But it feels like that first line is maybe a little bit of a sleeping giant right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the on-ice numbers in that game, the McDavid line had a lot more success. Of course, he was even 19 shot attempts, 0.75 expected goals for that line, where the McKinnon line kind of struggled, to be honest with you. They looked a lot more noticeable than maybe what shows up on the score sheet. Obviously, the power play goal early, too, helps things, but only 0.26 expected goals for per 60 by that line at 5v5. So they struggled a little bit, and I agree. I think a lot more ownership is going to pour in on that line for a couple of reasons. They were the line that put up all the points in the first game, maybe a little bit fraudulently in comparison to what the McDavid line was able to generate from an analytical perspective, but they're also just significantly cheaper, right? 17,600. You mentioned Mark Stone. That price tag is ridiculous. So it's just a lot easier to get to Canada too. So I think you're going to both of us will probably have a lot of leverage on the field with Canada 1. And I think that it's smart to get to go that route again. You still got that top power play correlation for both lines, right? You've got Reinhart, McDavid, and Crosby, McKinnon on that top power play unit. Mitch Marner, similarly to Mark Stone, feels underpriced at $5,300. I didn't think he had the best game in the opener, but obviously scored that big goal. Hopefully provides him with a little bit of a boost. I don't know if I'm going to get to a ton of this fourth line. Obviously, it's a little difficult to get to fourth lines. I don't think they're going to play a whole lot, but they're super, super cheap. Looks like a line that I thought that Jarvis and Marchand both looked really good in that first game. Sam Bennett's going to get his Four Nations debut. I don't mind taking some chances on some of these depth pieces if you're building a lot of lineups. Right? If you're 20 maxing I don't mind mixing them in a little bit. All you need is one goal from them at $9,900, and I think there's enough talent there. And I think Marchand and Jarvis looked good enough in that first game that they can certainly get on the score sheet in a real get different spot here. So I don't mind getting down there. And as I mentioned, this third line I think is one that I'm going to take a stance on. These are guys that we talk about this tournament, and these guys don't have a lot of chemistry. This is a trio that should have the most chemistry of any group in the entire tournament. Obviously you say what you will about the Kachuk brothers. They probably got plenty of chemistry as well, but all three playing from Tampa, they do spend some time together on the top power play unit at times this year. So these three should be very familiar with each other. I think that could pay dividends in this game. 13,400. I'll take my chances. Braden Points had a tremendous offensive season. Hagel's been great at 5v5. Strelly, we know how good Hagel Strelly has been at 5v5 together this year. So I like getting to them as well as a real kind of get different spot. I think that I'm going to probably use Canada a little bit more in terms of getting to the depth pieces than I am going to be the U.S. The U.S. feels a little bit more reliant on that top six, as Canada, I think, is a little bit deeper up front and can probably get scoring from all four lines in this game. So I'll probably go to the depth of Canada a little bit more than the U.S. I think that from the American side of things, it's going to be a lot of that top six for me. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. You take a look at that American game last night and those first 40 minutes again, it was kind of a plodding start to the game where it was a lot tighter than I think a lot of people were kind of anticipating. Obviously, the two Kachucks getting out there with Jack Eichel really started to change things around. It didn't really feel like the third and fourth lines were doing well. I mean, I shouldn't say that because, the third line had a pretty solid start to the game, all things considering, but it didn't really feel like on a regular basis they were generating a whole lot of offense out there. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see the Americans go really, really heavy and lean in on this top six. I mean, you take a look at the expected goal numbers for that, what will be the top line tomorrow, Kachuk, Eichel. I mean, they were just awesome. Like they were just an absolute wrecking ball out there in that third period. Finland had no answer for them. I think Canada is going to have a better answer. We were talking about this a little bit before the show, trying to kind of think about, okay, well, who are they going to use as this matchup line here going up against that top line? For me, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see them trying to put Sam Bennett out there up against them, especially because of the fact that, Bennett and Kachuk are teammates. Brad Marchand's a solid defensive player in his own right. Seth Jarvis, he's got two-way chops as well. You did mention that Canada 3 might get used as that matchup line, but we could even see like McKinnon going up head-to-head against that line too. I mean, you look at how solid defensively guys like Crosby and Mark Stone are. Nathan McKinnon, no slouch in his own zone either. So it's going to be really interesting to see the way these matchups kind of break down. But again, I do feel better about getting to these depth pieces on this Canada side more so than the U.S. side. Vincent Trocheck, Brock Nelson, they didn't really move the needle whatsoever. Kyle Connor lost his spot on the top line when that shuffle happened. Boldy, Miller, Larkin, they could find a way to be productive. But again, it kind of feels like those third and fourth lines are going to be asked to kind of grind things out a little bit more with that offense expecting to come from the top two lines.
Yeah, and I mentioned off the top, we don't know exactly what this U.S. lineup is going to look like. The one thing that I think was pretty safe to say is the Eichel line is going to be back together. They were so good after getting put together midway through that game. Gensel, Matthews, Hughes stuck together throughout the entirety of the game, so they should be together. And then the bottom six is really where I've got my questions. Initially, it was Connor, Miller, Boldy. And then as the third period got underway, or midway through the third period, it was Connor, Trocheck, Nelson, with Larkin moving up to the Miller Boldy line. So I think that the Larkin Connor could be swapped in this lineup. We just really have no way of knowing until maybe they're going to skate tomorrow before the game. But just if you do plan on playing them, it does kind of make a big difference in my opinion. I do think whoever's on that third line could still have some success, right? That third line looked pretty good last night with Boldy, Miller, and Kachuk when it was together. But the price difference is pretty drastic between Larkin and Kyle Connor. So it's going to be hard to kind of prepare for this. But it's so... To me, like, it's so easy to get to that Kachuk line. They looked so good. They're so cheap. I mean, we took a little bit of a look at the underlying metrics here in that game, but like ridiculous numbers here. Matthew Kachuk led the way with 1.32 expected goals for, and then Brady Kachuk 1.21. So basically tripling the rest of the lineup, just generating a ton of high danger looks. 5 for Matthews, 6 for Brady. Nobody else even had more than 2. So they were getting to the dirty areas. They were scoring goals. They've been they looked great together. I'm sure this is a big moment for them as well, getting a chance to do this together. And that line just feels like the line that I want as much exposure to as possible. Like I said, when we see ownership tomorrow, it's going to maybe change my mind a little bit if they come in too crazy high owned, but they look so dominant in that game. And I think that the one thing with Canada is like it feels like not knowing exactly who's going to match up. I feel like maybe it's that Mark Stone line just because like you're going to try to want to get some size out there against those guys or else they're going to push you around. The Canada team lacks a little bit of size. And I don't know if they really have an answer for that line. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, that line seems to be the one that, I really want to target. I think that in the same breath, I think it's going to cause this top line to go pretty overlooked, in my opinion. And I think Matthews was fairly invisible through the first 2 periods, looked a little bit better in the third. Jack Hughes was kind of doing his normal thing. Jake Gensel got on the board. I think this top line's second line's going to go overlooked a lot here. And they're super interesting to me as a result, because if everyone's going to be flocking to the cheaper and more productive Kachuk line, then I certainly want pieces of US2. I'm not going to buy too much into a 1-game sample size here, right? Like I don't want to overreact too much. Heading into that game, we really liked that Matthews Hughes duo a lot. I liked them much more than the Eichel line. Now that the Kachuk are with Eichel, it's kind of changed my perception of that a little bit, but I'm not going to let this one game just completely alter my decision on this Matthews Hughes duo, especially with Jake Gensel being just 5K. What do you think here?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's similarly to, when I talked about it earlier with the Canada side of things where, it feels like Canada 1 might be getting overlooked here just because of how productive Crosby and McKinnon were. It wouldn't surprise me in the least for that to be the case with USA too. I mean, again, when you take a look at that game, like that third period, obviously it goes without saying how productive, the Kachuk line was. 3 goals in that third period. They were great. But, Jake Gensel had that goal, 26 seconds into the third period as well. Gensel had a second assist on the Matthew Kachuk goal to start things off there as well. Little concerning for me, just kind of how invisible Matthews was. I know I was joking in our DFO DFS Discord that Matthews was on the milk carton through the first 2 periods. Felt like he showed up a little bit in that third period, but again, we talk about him being one of the best players in the world. Like he's a guy who's going to be up for this game too, going up against McDavid out there. So I'm going to be definitely interested in getting over the field on Canada 1 and USA 2, and probably soaking a lot of that ownership into USA 1 here as well. It wouldn't surprise me to see Jack Eichel come in as the lowest owned of those 3 guys up there on that top line. Feels like he's a little bit more of the facilitator for those 2 guys than he is going to be necessarily the big driver out there. So, Jack Eichel could be an interesting little pivot option tomorrow. I'm really curious to see what these ownership numbers look like when they come in, because honestly, man, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see Brady and Matthew Kachuk up in that 45-50% ownership range tomorrow, just given how much noise they made, in that game last night. If that number is that high, I might be a little bit comfortable coming in a little under the field on that. Coming in around that, 30-35% mark. I'll be 20 maxing tomorrow, so I'm going to have a lot of different lineups with a lot of different looks. But, it's not to say that I think they're going to be bad plays, because I think they'll be great plays. But it just feels like trying to get some leverage on. You got to find a way to get some leverage on the field somewhere, right? And I'm willing to take a bit of a stand if they're coming in that high on their ownership numbers.
Yeah, I mean, as a Canadian, I'm happy to come in under the field on that line if they're going to be that high owned, because like hopefully they don't have much success. Personally, hoping that. But you take a look here. I mean, this Matthews Hughes line did generate a lot of shot attempts, not necessarily the most high quality looks in comparison to that Kachuk line, but they really dominated possession against Finland. They had a good game overall, just not really finding the results on the score sheet. So I do think that that line, going back to that line, if they do get overlooked, is a tremendous option. Okay, we did talk about prior to that first game, like I was baffled as to why Zach Werenski wasn't on the top power play unit. I had mentioned that I think that it was just an effort for Team USA to just try to get 2 really balanced units, and I said that I probably expected them to see about 50-50 ice time, and that was kind of the result early in the game. That top power play unit really looked discombobulated and just couldn't really get anything going. Looks clunky. They move Rowensky up there, things kind of change, and it makes a lot more sense. And I think that now they're going to lean a little bit more heavily on that top unit because they looked a lot better with Zach Rowensky, which isn't totally surprising. He's just been absolutely dynamic this season. So once again, he was one of my favorite plays on that showdown slate, and he's easily one of my favorite plays on this slate again as well. $5,900, so easy to get to him. Love Zach Rowensky. I would say that him and Victor Hedman are my two favorite defensemen on this slate. Pretty easy to say, considering they're both on the top power play unit, but they look great. I'm going to be trying to get as much exposure to Rowensky and Hedman as possible where I can. Cale Makar is a game time decision. He missed practice today due to an illness. Thomas Harley has joined. I guess he hasn't joined the team. He's technically not allowed to join the team as far as I know until Makar is ruled out, basically. He's not allowed to participate in team activities. He's there only in an emergency situation. So if Makar can't go, Thomas Harley will step in. That being said, John Cooper did say today he expects Makar to be in the lineup tomorrow. So just keep in mind that there's a possibility he's out, but I mean, even if you play Makar, you could probably pretty easily just pivot to Zach Rowensky. It is worth mentioning that if Makar does not play, Josh Morrissey was the guy on the top power play unit in practice today. So Morrissey would obviously receive a massive bump, especially at $5,200. He is expected to move up to PP2 with Shea Theodore out. We actually didn't get a look at that unit without Theodore because they only had the one power play and they only had 5 seconds on the power play. So hopefully there's a little bit more penalties in this game. I just want to see that top power play as much as possible. But Morrissey expected to get a little bit of boost on second power play unit as well. We talked a little bit about some of these depth defensemen from the USA side of things already. Jacob Slavin at $2,900 makes some sense. I think Brock Faber as well, if you're not getting to Rowensky. Those would be my two favorites. How about on the Canada side of thing? I mentioned Devon Taves being a nice play the other night. He looked tremendous in that first game. An absolute horse. He played like 27 minutes at $3,500. If you can't get to the expensive Canadian defenseman, I think Devon Taves is my favorite of the bunch. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. Devon Taves did look awesome out there. I think he's going to be a really solid play. I don't mind getting down to a guy like Noah Hannafin either at $3,400. 2 shots, 2 blocks in that game last night against Finland. So he was definitely in the mix there as well. One more block, that's a shot bonus right there for him. So, or the shot block bonus rather for him. So I don't mind that option whatsoever. Probably going to be pretty heavy again on Zach Werenski. I mean, I was touting him as one of my favorite plays. I got an absolute ton of them in my lineups, and it worked out pretty well for me. 20.8 DraftKings points, 3 apples, had a shot, had a block. Wouldn't surprise me to see the shot and block numbers increase here in a much bigger game here going up against Canada. But, he's a guy who's going to be in the mix for sure. Might be one of my favorite plays on the entire slate, to be totally honest with you. I think he's going to be in a really, really great spot. You talk about the power play units as well. One thing that was kind of interesting too with what the Americans did, they really split up their power play time pretty evenly. They got a couple of power plays throughout that game. Really tried to split things up, whereas Canada really loaded up on that top power play unit. So don't be shy to get to some US power play 2 builds. It's going to be a chippy game. It's going to be a feisty game out there. I wouldn't be surprised to see each side get 3 or 4 power play opportunities in this game here tomorrow night. So just some building strategy stuff right there. I don't mind that option whatsoever either.
If you're really dumpster diving, I think I would probably skip over like Parayko and Sanheim at 37 and 3,800 and end up landing on Doughty at 3K. Issue with him is he's just probably going to be on that third player, probably projected for just 16 minutes, so probably not the best. You're probably looking at better value defensemen from the other teams than Canada. For the most part, it looks like it's like Devon Taves, Cale Makar, maybe some Morrissey, in my opinion. Zach, you ready to get to the goalies?
Yeah, I actually don't mind getting to Parayko, to be honest with you. I think I'm probably a little higher on him than you are. 11.4 points in that game against Sweden, 3 shots, 3 blocks. He found a way to get in the mix. And again, he's one of these kind of like Canada lifer, old veteran guys that are there. So I think I'm a little comfortable getting to some Parayko. But yeah, the goaltenders, man, kind of going to be interesting here too to talk about.
Parayko is the type of guy that I could see being up against like that Kachuk line, right? Need some size, some physicality out there against those guys, and he could be certainly live for the shot block bonus if he's up against that line at all in this game. Okay, let's get to the goalies. Again, we talk about it all the time when we break down these 2-game NHL slates. A 2-game NHL slate is weird. A hockey slate is weird when you've got goalies, right? Like you basically are just playing the ones that you're not targeting in your builds. So it's hard to really say like who the best plays are, but I think that my favorite is certainly the most expensive, and that's Philip Gustafsson. I said I think it's probably going to be a 3-1 Sweden win, $8,000, highest implied win percentage. It makes a lot of sense. The shot volume is probably not going to be great, but like he might still be optimal if he only faces 23 shots. If Hellebuck and Binnington both give up 3 or 4 goals, Gustafsson could certainly be the optimal goalie. So he is my favorite. Hellebuck grades out at 7,600 as the best, just projected to see the most shot volume. I don't feel necessarily amazing about the shot volume projections. I will probably tweak these charts tomorrow when some of the goalie lines start to get released. They hadn't when I built the charts initially. I'll probably tweak them a little bit tomorrow. So some of the stuff will be a little different than the video when you're on the charts tomorrow if you use them tomorrow. And also, the Canadians did not announce whether or not Jordan Binnington would get the start. There's a pretty good chance that they go to Adin Hill. I would say it's a 50-50 chance. Binnington looked like he was in the starters net today, though, so I would imagine it's going to be him, but just keep in mind, you might have to make that pivot to Adin Hill tomorrow. Lankinen, I think is a desperation play. I think that there's some builds for me where it's going to be like really heavy Canada, USA game stack, and then maybe Barkov or maybe just like Mata and Lankinen from the other game, and just hopefully maybe Finland sneaks out with a win in this game in a 2-1 fashion or something like that, and Lankinen ends up having a good game. He's had a tremendous year. He's got a pretty good international track record as well. So I think Lankinen's got a points proof here at $7,400. I think that he is more viable than I think probably his ownership will suggest tomorrow. And I just feel a lot more comfortable getting to the goalies from that Sweden-Finland game than I do the US-Canada game. That being said, I do think Canada is probably going to win tomorrow. Like I hope that's the case. I just don't know how much of the actual Canadian goaltending I'm going to get to. Like it just feels really, really easy to get to Team USA stacks. But I think that everybody's feeling that way. So I think that there's going to be a lot of leverage on the Canadian goaltender as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there either. Like I could see, not a ton of ownership coming in, on Binnington or Hill. Again, we talk about, expecting a lot of ownership coming in on the Kachuk line. The Matthews line, they'll probably see their fair share as well out there. I kind of don't mind the idea of getting down to Lankinen at all here. I really think we're going to be kind of splitting hairs on the scores for goaltenders here tomorrow. I think they're all going to be within a pretty similar range here, right? Like, I don't know how high of a volume game that Sweden-Finland's going to be, especially from the Finland side. I mean, they had I think it was like 16 shots on goal against the US last night. I think they're going to fare a little bit better going up against Sweden than they are the Americans. But, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see Finland really struggled to generate a whole ton of shot volume. Yeah, 21 shots on goal for them. So it was some tough sledding out there for sure. So, I know for me, like one thing that I'm not going to be shying away from is having some one-offs or like some small mini stacks against a goaltender if I need to as well. Like, I've got one build where I kind of tried to play around with like a cash game approach, and I ended up with Austin Matthews as a one-off going up against Jordan Binnington. Like, I think you're okay to do stuff like that in a tournament like this, or in a 2-game slate like this, I suppose. That's stuff that I'll regularly do in 2-game slates as well. Obviously, I don't really think I'd be going with, stacking against a goaltender or anything like that. But again, you got to find ways to get different. You think there's a lot of people out there these days that are using optimizers that are telling their optimizers to not have any players going up against opposing goaltenders. So just one way you can kind of get yourself a little bit different, much more comfortable doing so with defensemen against goaltenders than I am with the forwards per se. But again, if you got a volume guy like Matthews usually is, or one of the Kachucks, they're definitely going to be volume players tomorrow. I don't hate that route at all.
Yeah, you do it a lot more than I do for sure. I don't mind doing like a defenseman, maybe like an Oli Mata, like a guy that I'm probably just hoping gets the shot block bonus at minimum price or 2,900 or whatever against my goalie. You definitely do it more than me, but it's certainly viable in these 2-game slates just because you got to try to get different somewhere. And I think that's a good point. Like, if the goalies are kind of just close in terms of scoring, might as well play the cheapest one if you need to get some salary relief. So I don't mind getting Lankin. I think there's plenty of leverage on the Binnington or Hill play. And then I think it's safe to say that Gustafsson is probably the best play overall, and Hellebuck, obviously the best goalie overall. So a lot to think about between the pipes, but again, it's just going to kind of coming down to your build. And as I mentioned, this is it for me and Zach in terms of live shows, but the charts will be updated again tomorrow. They are currently live on dailyfaceoff.com. If you are new to the show, you've never seen these charts, they are 100% free. All you got to do is go to dailyfaceoff.com, go to the DFO DFS projections, and you can get the charts right here. That is going to do it for this edition of the DFO DFS report. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Please, if you could, smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube. Over 900 live viewers right now. Absolutely love the support. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. We didn't know if we really planned on bringing these live shows about this tournament, but I was so excited about this tournament. I kind of talked Zach into it. I'm like, let's just do it. And then it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this tournament so far. Tomorrow is going to be an absolute blast. So hopefully, what have we got here? Hopefully Canada can pull out the victory tomorrow. But what did you say yesterday? This is my Tony Kornheiser moment.
That's right.
So here we go. Go Canada, go, baby. We'll see you guys back here for a 2-game slate on Monday. Until then, cheers.
Cheers.